And what comes next can be called as a Polish section, because we will learn a lot about the Polish higher education law reform, which is titled Law 2.0. And we got two excellent presenters. First, Dominik Antonowicz, who is a sociologist by professional education and also researchers at Copernicus University. And I guess you are going to present a kind of bottom-up perspective, how the new act is applied and what are the challenges and advantages, disadvantages of this new concept. So it's about university governance. We are very open and curious about how it works in practice.
Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and I feel honored to be here and for the keynote to present the deficits, basically, the deficits that stem from the organizational model of the university governance in Poland, and the deficits that have been addressed by the Law 2.0, the reform which is now literally on its way. Okay, speaking quickly, Poland, just for those who have a just proud view, is a 40 million people, about almost 500 higher education institutions, 430 basically. Most of them are private, they are small, but the system is driven by the public institutions. 75% of students attend public universities, so it's the reform is in the spot also because it concerns mostly the public sector, public sector institutions. We have about more than 100,000 academics, so it's a big cohort. And in terms of rankings, because the rankings don't matter in that reform, we might not like them, but we can't ignore them. So there is a big disappointment because the Warsaw University is about the 300, 400 place, so it's a fourth league, I would say. And in Shanghai University, and it's about fifth league in Times Higher Education. So the position of universities are below the expectations of the politicians, but also the society. So, but it's very difficult to talk about university governments without history. And I think history says us a lot and also provides a number of explanations to the dilemmas that I would today try to address. The first one is university governance, the internal structure, has been always regulated nationally since the first time there was national legislation in regards to higher education. So it's literally almost 100 years ago, it's in 1920. And it's always part of regulative order, as Guy Neef would say. So people get used to that the internal governments of universities are very much legislated, organized by the national law. We can talk about autonomy and stuff, but it's a part of academic culture. We just get used to it. Too much, I guess. But it was always the case. Whether it was before the Second World War, during the communist times, but also after 1990, there was always been national legislation that sets the internal university governance structure. But looking back to the past, we know from the research that the university governance, the autonomy versus not accountability, but autonomy versus the impact of the government has been heavily politicized. It was in the first legislation in 1920 when the government gave a lot of power to university in terms of self-organization, but it was a newly established country, that was understandable. But then, legislation by legislation, in the 1930s, just before the Second War, the government tried to penalize academics for too much freedom and too much opposition against the political regime at the time. So it decreases or limits its autonomy. So the same case was in the communist times when the communist authorities, once they extend their autonomy, giving the academics just a bit more space, not big space, but still more space. Then after 68, limited after the martial law in 1981, again did the same. So it's a political, it's a field when the political power, government or politicians are basically playing the cat and mouse game with the academic community. And academics are often seen the university governance structure as a proxy of a freedom. So since 1990, because that's the period which we actually care the most, as the university government has been driven by the collegiality, it's very collegial, autonomy, which is, I would say, was a very hermetic meaning of that word. So it's basically cut off from the world outside. Democracy, so with this internal election, and self-governance. So there's literally no interference from the world outside, either from politicians, which is very good, nor from the business community, which is perhaps less fortunate. So, but that's the picture which shows you that for us, for researchers, and I'm a head of the research unit, the small team that conduct researchers into higher education and also the research system, where we try to address all the fears, the reasons for reforms, and other, appealing challenges. We have to look at the past to understand certain patterns because they are irrational in a way we perceived from the outsiders. If you say why the Polish university are so cut off from the reality in terms of governance, it's because there was a part of freedom that for a number of decades the academic community enjoy, or small part of freedom, and it's been a symbol of what we call the freedom of research or freedom of teaching. They've been numerous times attacked by the communism regime in previous times. Even, since 1990 has been only 30 years, but still the feeling that this is the value or we have to cherish remains strong. So that looks like to researchers into higher education in Poland. But the best way, I'll be using, the quotas from people from outside Poland when they referred, the researchers basically, when they referred, how they refer to university governance. And this is Michael Dobbins, actually working in Germany, but he's American or British born. So he says Polish public higher education institution governance has been relatively change resistant until the most recently, and characterized more by steadiness and historical institutions than a policy change. And I would say to you something about the attitudes toward change in university governance. It's basically very conservative. It hasn't changed for decades now, and it's been protected by the academics, whether it's good or not, but very effectively. So, but reforms, and reforms like the law to zero, but also previous attempts, needs problems, right? That's a basic fact. Those who are doing research in higher education policy knows that there's no reforms if there's no problems. And Brunson and Olsen are two famous scholars from the organizational studies who say reforms need problems and problems need solutions. A supply of problems needs to be complemented with a supply of solutions, preferably more or less ready solutions, so the packages. And we know organizations like OECD, like the World Bank, provides us ready solutions. So who actually signal the problems? Because until 2005, there was no sign of the problem with the university governance. I mean, people within the higher education was very much happy because there was their system, their universities. And people from outside higher education little care about their higher education. And little care has been manifested by the number of money, Polish zloty, invested in higher education, which was very, very low. And I think Bartek Banaszak will perhaps tell more about the financial contribution of the state to the higher education. If you, well, the trust in higher education is always a a difficult subject to talk, but how you measure trust? Do people trust higher education? Well, we don't know. We have different opinions, but one of the measures is how much of public money goes to higher education. And using that measure, we can see that the trust is very low. Has been very low, is low, but we hope it's increased. But without reforms, that might be a problem. So who was the whistleblower? Who says, or who said in the past that the governance system, the internal governance system, is perhaps inefficient? So there was actors from outside higher education, from outside Polish higher education. There was World University rankings. They signaled first that Polish universities are far below what we would expect as citizens and taxpayers. Since they appeared on the horizon, of course, the general feeling is let's ignore them. Okay, they don't measure what is important and so on, but it can't really escape from the reality. You know, they are becoming more important in a talks, in a policy, in a popular culture, and so the first 3 or 4 rounds was ignored, but now with the internalization and Polish universities seeking international students outside, they start to think that rankings might say something, especially those to students and also higher education institutions who are located, or which are located in a big distance from Poland. So they don't know anything about my university, but they can try to track one in rankings to know what one represents. And the second one is a general failure in the framework program for research and technology. Now Horizon 2020, but it was previous times as well. And that was one of the major reasons for frustration that politicians start to express, because it turned up that Poland contributes more to the common budget than can actually take it from it. And this whole, I would say, myth of the great Polish science and the rankings that awfully constructed against us began to emerge false. And the framework programs was one of those signals that was actually heard by politicians more than anything else. And then 2 global players are usually asked by the governments, but they also do the sort of quite regular studies, the World Bank and OECD. Right, very nice review, but it gently pointed that there is perhaps something, homework to be done in terms of the government, the internal structure, because it's inefficient, inaccountable. And perhaps that's the also reason why the taxpayers don't want to invest money, because they can't see the added value from higher education. Of course, we as academics, we don't understand, we don't accept that, but it's the fact that the taxpayers gives us their money. And they are the third one, the last one, is that in 2009, I think the previous government commissioned the report, which was delivered by the consortium of experts, who were experts from the higher education, not from outside, but under the name of Ernst & Young, and also the Danube Institute for Market Economics. And it was very critical as well, pointing mostly the same soft spots of higher education. And, well, of course, the previous reports were ignored and mostly downplayed by the, also rectors. But the last one, it was not in downplaying, but the fact that somebody from outside higher education was there to come up on stage and openly critique the way that universities are organized, become a sort of very, it was a point of the fire, and also the reason why the governance structure began to be in the center of public debate for a short time. But still, some people start to question, do we need more accountable higher education institution or not? Of course, it is not very, I would say, sexy topic, so there are others that will sweep the topic of university governance, but it was the first time it was in the center of debate. So major problems. I try to find the major problems. It's not my idea, but I look at the reports and also the policy debates, and there are 5 of them. So fragmentation of the university, lack of public accountability, weak managerial capacity, over-regulation of higher education, and inward-oriented thinking. There are structural points, but also cultural points. Okay, let's start with fragmentation of the university. So universities appears, or Polish university appears to be a classic example of loosely coupled organizations. So they are, individual faculties are really as separate units. When I mean separate units with the separate identity, symbols, power structure, and they feel like they are walking with the university together, that's okay, but they can walk to the other way, completely to the reverse direction. With their own governance structure, with their own internal accountability, means the dean is elected by their colleagues and accountable to their colleagues. So if the rector wants something from the dean, well, he might say, I agree with you, rector, but my colleagues who elected me not, and that's what it counts at the end of the day. But also, until I think last year, they have an independent stream funding. So the department was funded by the ministry. I mean, only via university, but it was just administrative way. But they were applied for money and they got their money, not the university. So the university was really a federation of faculties, run by the deans who were accountable to their faculty councils. And some might say it's okay, but it's very difficult to manage that university in any respect. So this is a quote from OECD. Some of you might don't like it, but it's they make a point, I guess, that would softly. So there appears to be a confusion about the purpose of representative bodies, senates, faculty meetings, and in particular about their roles in executive bodies on one hand and deliberative or legislative bodies on the other hand. It's neither effective nor efficient to hand executive powers to large representative bodies. Okay, there are faculty councils with 200 people. To make decision is very difficult. It's very difficult to find people to have a quorum during the meetings to make any decision, because they have a teaching loads, research loads, and so on. So lack of a public accountability, and that was a big case. And I mean, we had previous presentations about accountability, cooperation with the industry. That's not really a case in Poland. The model of university governance doesn't offer any formal or informal structure to bridge university with the world outside. When I'm meaning the no formal and informal structure, they are very hermetic organization, and very much like a Humboldtian times. But it was obviously the different economy. So it's largely hermetic, driven by the logic of Republic of Scholars, and it's a important part of the culture. That's our university. So this is a quote of one of the rectors from the study which I done with the Ben Youngblood from the University of Twente in Netherlands. From the past, we took over a university as a prestigious global institutions which emanates certain ethos, but it doesn't hold any accountability to society for its performance. And that's perhaps describes the best this lack of accountability. Weak managerial capacity. So we come back again to the Republic of Scholars. The best, I mean, the most advanced logic of Republic of Scholars in Europe, according to the KWIEK studies. And some professors become very commanding figures at the university structure. They don't have to be in any position, but they are just, just big figures, prominent figures, and they can ignore whatever actor says because of their position. So it's very difficult to sack professor if he does do nothing, and it's a quote which says you a lot of. In Poland, you cannot lay off a university professors, even if he's lazy, doesn't do any research at all, and his teaching is below any standards, unless he commits a crime. And it's frustrating for me, for rectors like me, and that's a quote from the rector. So it's supposed to show you difficulties. Over-regulation, and I think that's everywhere, basically, but it's over-regulation. We come back to the state regulation, and state regulates almost every aspect of the university, especially in terms of teaching and also funding. So, and it's what's worse, I think, it's focused on process rather than outcomes. So the regulation is really, it's really a bureaucratic corset on the university performance, focusing on how the money is spent rather than what the money brings in terms of the value. So it's very, very difficult. So, and the last one is culture thing. So it's an inward-oriented thinking. The university governance structure is focused on who gets what. It's about balancing different groups within higher education institutions. From that department, from the other department, students, senior academics, junior academics. It doesn't really look at what it brings to students in terms of teaching, what it brings to the society in terms of research. It's all about how to balance these different groups, not to kill each other in the Senate meetings. And it's been always there. It's a model which has been practiced in the Netherlands in the 1960s. Or in German, I think there was the same part in France, reflecting the democratic model of the university, which you have to balance different groups emerging from the massification. But now it's more or less gone. And this is the final stage when I'm trying to introduce the law to zero. Previously, I was just talking about the dilemmas, problems, deficits, whatever it's called. And I think Bartek will take the floor in a few minutes to give you more insight into the reform itself. But I'm focusing only on the structure of the university governments. So how I want to address it? How does it work? Okay, on the green button on the app, you can see for the very first time ever in that country to have a supervisory board. Okay, and it's to make it more adventurous. Those boards has lay members, so the members from outside the community, which is shocking. I mean, some people think it's still unacceptable. I mean, that somebody from outside university can be in a part of the government system. Of course, okay. So the blue arrows shows who is electing who. The red arrows is who is accountable to who. Just to make a long story short. So still, the rector will be elected by the academic community, which are representatives of the collegium of lecturers, but it's representatives of the academic community only. There's no other model. But the rector will be accountable to do both to the supervisory boards, which can be consist from 9 persons. 4 of them will be internal, 4 will be external, and 1 will be the representative of students. And to University Senate as a group representation of the academic community. But the supervisory boards will be elected and accountable to University Senate. So even in external members, like in the Finnish model, because it's literally taken from Finland, policy borrowings, will be elected by the University Senate. So to make sure that the wrong candidates, random candidates, former politicians, not necessarily will join the supervisory boards, killing the whole, I think, quite smart idea in the very, very beginning. So whoever University Senates will elect, it's up to them. Of course, some of them will elect stupid candidates, others will elect wise candidates, but it's up to University Senate. And the rector, which is now will be the more boss than previously, will hold the power, and there is a toppling model, so he will appoint deans. So that's the logic will be very different than it's now, when the deans are elected by the colleagues in the faculties. So basically, the deans also will be accountable to the director for whatever they do. So the rector can appoint, but also can dismiss, which is not the case now. So what basically is the model, I think it's very simple, that the director will be much stronger as an executive. And he's the boss of all employees. But he's also accountable to the academic community, but also partly, because the supervisory boards do not have much power, but it's a symbolic power, because the barbarians basically entering the academia. I mean, if you like this metaphor, which is very often used. But I think it will sort of try to bridge the university with the world outside. And perhaps in a short term, it wouldn't bring any great value, but at least it changed the way of thinking. They are part of the structure. Okay? And this is the model which I would say cost the most the academics' attention, also the big controversies, mostly because of the green bottom up, which was the introductionary of the supervisory boards. We don't know. The boards will be erected in I think next month until the June 2019. So it's an ongoing process. You will see the outcome. But I think that's the way we would like to address, or the governments would like to address, and the deficits which I listed you before. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dominik. And I secretly imagined a big clash between you and the next presenter, because you represent the academic world and Bartolomei will represent the ministry. But I think your presentation focused much more about the roots of the reform, the background, and what are the essence of this new setup. If we are just compared to the Hungarian system, we are probably a little bit more extreme, because we got consistorium, not supervisory board, but the larger part of it is nominated by the minister.
Right.
Higher education or the human resources, and also the rector got this kind of discretion to decide, sometimes against the Senate or the faculty meeting proposal for the dean position. So in fact, what you are planning to do from now, it is already a reality, even more, probably more controlled at the university. But there are some questions, please.
Yeah, here. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Actually, in Germany, we have sort of started in different countries 10, sometimes 20 years ago with changing things like that. A few remarks. When you transform the universities into a sort of a managed system with management, etc., according to criteria outside university, it has to be clear that there's always a balance between leadership, management, and academic freedom. And this is very important, I think. First of all, I always thought that there are two institutions that are very old. And that is the Catholic Church and the university. And something is to these institutions, because otherwise they would not be there anymore. The second thing is the director of the Weizmann Institute. Recently I talked with him. He firmly, and for his institution, this is an institution that is not just pure academic. It's the institute with the largest spin-offs worldwide. It's technology-driven, it's immediate application, if you wish, but their basic principles are the following. It's people, it's infrastructure, and it's freedom. And that's it. And management, interestingly, is not playing the top priority there. And everything, whatever you have in this model, what it has to do is to enable the researchers, to give them the freedom, and to enable the other side. And maybe research and education is a bit separated here. The education to be in a structured way so that the young people that get out are really prepared for the outside world. This is probably what the top, the leaders, the rector, the college of the deans or whatever, that's their main job. And to find ways to make that in a productive way with limited resources. Let's get that really very clear. I mean, we always compare it with US universities or the ETH in Zurich has the same budget as Max Planck, as total Max Planck Society in Germany. So that has to be clear. And of course, they have a number of Nobel Prize winners, but you have to compare that to whole Max Planck.
Okay, can I just respond to it?
Of course.
I think in that model, none of these elements would threaten academic freedom. There's nothing there. But what I would say, the reform, and why this reform is controversial, and before Bartek will come on stage, it's going from eminence to evidence. It's basically trying to departure from the quite feudal university. Once you're a professor, you actually can do nothing, and you're still at the university. Okay, it's a part of freedom. It wouldn't change rapidly, but at least now the university accountable in terms of the research outcomes. We might argue whether publications are the only outcomes we expect them, but at least we can make a benchmark what we expect from whoever you are in the hierarchy, because in the previous years there was just clear expectations from those people, the junior academics. You have to publish or perish. But the higher you go, the expectations are getting lower, and this model will give lecturer more power to actually signal what you actually expect from academics. So there is a lot of talk about the freedom, but in the model, there is no politicians there. So there's no direct interference from the ministry. None of the ministry, and I think what was clear from the very beginning, that the ministry would not send to supervisory boards or whoever plays in the structure any of his or her representatives, because that might be a wrong signal. So it's in terms of academic freedom, of course, it's threatened here and there in the different grants, but in managerial model, as you can rightly point, one of these principles is not to make a threat to freedom of research, basically, and teaching. And I don't think that's any realistic. But I guess also resources that matters, and you can sort of spin the tea with the spoon very faster, but it doesn't make the tea sweeter when there's no sugar. So, but that's of course if there is no resources, we can sort of reorganize the system, or the government can sort of reorganize it, but no money, no music.
We will continue. Just a remark, because we here in Hungary especially sensitive to this kind of autonomy, and government officials say that the financial autonomy is different from academic autonomy. I suspect that the two are somehow still connected, so cannot be separated in a very, very clear basis. And in Hungary, probably it turned out from the presentation of Ms. Olivia Pavlik. So in Hungary, the chancellor is nominated by the Minister of Human Resources. There is no say, any kind of say from the institutional side, so we cannot even vote or propose somebody. It is absolutely and employed 100% by the ministry.
So that's a completely different story.
It's quite different. And in addition to this, we got this consistorium, which is quite similar to the supervisory board of yours, but with the majority of the external and externally nominated members. So it's much more rigid and controlled. Another two questions, and after that, Bartolomei will come. You first, probably. Or you first, okay, sorry.
Thank you very much. I want to ask, maybe I didn't hear it, but who is the external members of the board? Who is nominating them, and who are they? And also maybe if you say something more about this collegium of electors, who are they? Because I think that if you are about to empower the rector, it's going to be very important who the rector is going to be, because it can be someone who can do a lot of good things, but maybe someone who can do a lot of bad things. So I think these are quite key things, like in what way this is going to improve the quality of the rector in your view. So if you can maybe explain a little bit more. Thank you.
Sure. Just a quick word. The Collegium of Electors, that's a representative academic community. The only guarantee quota that have is 20% of them are students. And they are clearly the representatives of the academic community. Each university will decide what will be the structure of the Collegium of Electors. In my university, each department has 3 professors, 3 junior academics, 2 students, and so on. And perhaps there will be a representative body of entire university, but each university has a different structure. So the Collegium of Electors wouldn't change much, but it's the academic community. Basically, not all academic not the all academics can vote. So it's a sample of them will become a collegium in the collegium of electors, and it's been 4 years in the system. It's nothing new. In terms of supervisory boards, I have no idea who people will be. There is because they haven't been elected yet, but there cannot be politicians. That's for sure, and they are elected by the university senate. So the senate will elect both internal and external members of supervisory boards, and also can dismiss them. If they don't perform, they can be dismissed by the, let's say, academic community through the senate. So it's still very much controlled by the academic community in a very, direct sense. But I don't know. I'm researching supervisory boards, and I'm really looking forward to know who will be in the first round. And I think since January they will become appointed to the new members, but I have no idea.
Okay, and yes, you okay? You just.
I just wonder, in my country, Croatia, University Senate is Collegium of Electors. Why you do have two? Because Senate is, we have federation also in university, so all schools have delegates, students have delegates, all together they are Senate. So who is this another body?
So that's, it's not, if you say why, I don't know. The answer is historically has been the Collegium of Rectors elect the rector, and it's the only function this governing has. It has been. I'm a member of the Collegium of Rectors in my university, and we meet twice. Once we elect the rector, and second time vice rectors, and that's it. And mission completed basically. And we can also dismiss the rector, but it's not going to happen. But usually, of course, there could be Senate, and I think they will be more efficient. But for historical reasons, of course.
Very catchy American system with electors and
No, that's nothing to do with that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I think one short remark and a question. So this model is similar the old Hungarian model with the Financial Council. It was working from 25 till 2012 maybe, and the present model in Hungary, as George mentioned, is very, very different. And there is another very important difference, the constitution in Poland and Hungary, because of the fact the Polish constitution, as I remember, declared the autonomy of university without delimitation. In spite of it, the Hungarian constitution secured the government to delimit the autonomy. So it is a very, very huge difference. And in connection with it, in Hungary, the consistory has veto right in academic matters. For example, innovation plan and
budget,
development plan, budget, and all of the important and necessary matters. Does this supervisory board veto right on something like that have in Poland?
Yeah, just initially it had been designed to have a much stronger position with including the right, to veto right to the budget. But after the law went to the parliament, and then like in parliament, they've been much softened, and I would say supervisory boards now has the only real power. I would say is it nominates candidates, because the small arrow there, it means that supervisory boards prepare the short list of candidates for the election to be elected for the rectors, and that's really strong power. Otherwise, they have a right to make opinion about documents like budgets, like strategic plans. It's soft power, but I can't imagine rector now who will go for the budget which didn't get the approval from the supervisory boards. It's symbolic power, which I would say it's worth more than the hard veto right, the hard veto right. But I guess a consortium in Hungary is much more stronger than in Poland. And in Poland, there's no figure within the university which has been appointed or sent or elected by the government. There is a clearly, I mean, politicians basically, there's a clearly a wall, and there's on both sides, and I think quite lucky, is understood that it wouldn't work for universities. I mean, it would increase the power of government, but it definitely would decrease the already limited trust in any politician or in any government.
It's quite funny because, as my colleague said, it is like the old Hungarian models, and in Ulm, just 1 year ago, we have learned that the present Hungarian model is the old German model, the very old German model.